Chief Justice, Your Grace, Sasha, of course, commissioners, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here to speak to you today about this very important matter. I'd like to say I was very much touched by things that were said yesterday by the commissioners. But I must, if I may single out Commissioner Patel, she didn't know it because we spoke earlier that when she told us about Iqbal, the young boy from Pakistan, who was murdered for trying to expose child labor in Pakistan, he said he was tied to the loom. A young Canadian about the same age, 11 or 12, called Craig Kilgour, happened to see that account of his death. And Craig that day went back to his school and started what became Free the Children. His brother Mark joined him. They are now, I believe, in 45 countries. And they're following in the footsteps, as you said yesterday, of Iqbal. So I was really, my spine was when you were talking about that. So let me, I'll give you the shortened version of this. And I couldn't agree more that human trafficking is an appalling form of modern slavery. There are estimated to be more slaves today than at any time in human history, as I think we all heard yesterday. Now, people say, why? It's a lack of general awareness. It's poor data. It's insufficient legal systems. Most absent of all is a coordinated international campaign. Responsible national governments worldwide need to act together on this terrible issue with a unified purpose. As you've seen on the projection and comments already made, there's a related scourge of organ pillaging, which we're speaking to obviously today. It's been going on, as you've heard, for about 20 years. In mid-2006, the Coalition to Investigate the Persecution of Falun Gong asked David Matus and I to investigate it. We went into it with open minds. We were, I think, both of us hoping it wasn't going to be true, but we very quickly discovered that it was true. And there's been reference to 50 kinds of evidence. I was a prosecutor for 10 years, so I should know something about evidence. And we came up with our report, a revised report, and then a book called Bloody Harvest. And we've continued to investigate ever since. We concluded that for 41,500 transplants done in the years 2000 to 2005 in China, the only reasonable explanation for sourcing was Falun Gong. Here are just two kinds of evidence of the 18 substantive kinds of evidence we found. We had people calling to institutions across China, hospitals, prisons, and so on, mostly hospitals, asking if they had Falun Gong organs available. I think you mentioned, Sasha, that, or no, actually it was Robert who mentioned yesterday that Falun Gong don't smoke or drink. They're very healthy, and that's the reason that people wanted Falun Gong organs, and we discovered that. And as I think it was mentioned in the film, that only Falun Gong were examined by doctors coming into these forced labor camps. And of course they wondered, why are you examining me when you're torturing me to give up my Falun Gong beliefs? So, and the way it works, of course, is that when somebody arrives in Shanghai, the #1 people's hospital in Shanghai is where most people go from Europe. They're blood tested and so on, and then they go out on the computer and they find a match for somebody through this testing of Falun Gong, and they go out to the camp and they grab the poor man or woman and they give them a potassium, now it appears, and their liver or whatever is taken out. It's flown to Shanghai, and somebody comes back to London with a new liver, and they're probably told they're getting it from a convicted murderer, although of course they don't want it from a convicted murderer, they want it from a Falun Gong practitioner. But this is just absolutely sick beyond belief that this is happening, and I wonder how many of you, probably all of you, are aware of it, but I'm always astounded at how many people are not aware that this has been going on since 2000. It's got to stop, and I really think Ethan and Enver will speak about this too. I think we're close to the point where they're going to stop because they're getting so much bad publicity about it. Falun Gong practitioners who got out of China told us that they'd been in camps. They told us that what had happened to them. I just described it to you a bit. This was necessary to create a live bank of donors. And the next part of my talk was dealing with the slaughter, which, how many years did you spend working on that book?
7, but I took 2 hours to make a snack in the kitchen.
All right, well, your book went up to 2008. It came out in 2014. I hope you've all got a copy of it. It's a marvelous book. And your closing words, are you going to read your closing words to the...
No, I won't.
All right, well, let me read them to you. Then it's very, I think you'll agree with, I hope you'll agree with them. No Western entity possesses the moral authority to allow the party, the Communist Party of China, to impede the excavation of a crime against humanity in exchange for promises of medical reform. As a survival mechanism for our species, we must contextualize, evaluate, and ultimately learn from every human descent into mass murder. The critical thing is that there is a history, and only the victims' families can absolve the party from its weight, close quote. Ethan and David Matus and I released an update in June of 2016 in Washington, Ottawa, and Brussels. You can access it from our website. I hope you all will. It's got 470 footnotes. We don't want you to read the footnotes, but 700 pages depending on the font size. You'd agree? So we've really gone into these hospitals very, very carefully. We concluded that by looking at things like medical journals and nurses' journals, all kinds of things, that hidden websites and hidden archive material, that this is a state-run system across China, and it's run by the government, and I think you heard on the tape, it's the only place in the world where the government runs this heinous system of killing human beings. We concluded cautiously that a minimum of 60,000 transplants per year are being done across China, not the approximately 10,000 the government likes to convince people that they're doing. There's a very small pool of voluntary donors, and maybe Ethan will speak about that, plus a few thousand convicted prisoners. By my lawyer's arithmetic, which you know is not good, about 150 people a day are being killed for their organs in China. That's a lot of human beings. We provide much evidence of a state-directed organ transplantation network controlled through national policies and funding and implicating both the military and the civilian broadcast systems. This all stopped in January 2015. If you believe that, I've got some swampland I'd like to talk to you about. Is there swampland near London? And they use a semantical trick that reclassifies prisoner organs as being voluntary donations. That's the way they try to pull the wool over our eyes. Now, professionals who should know better, I include in that the World Health Organization, the Transplantation Society, the TTS, the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, have accepted the party line, skipping over as Louisa Greve, who worked for the National Endowment for Democracy in East Asia for many years, quote, the admission that China's billion-dollar transplantation industry was built on prisoner organs, close quote. Last fall, after a screening of the Peabody Award-winning film Human Harvest at a theater in Boston's Harvard Square, I stressed some points made by David Matus, which I agree with completely, and I'll just give you some of them. As you probably all know, mental health professionals responded globally to what the Soviet Union was doing with their psychiatric practices and helped, I think, to end it. But the global transplantation profession can be broken into 3 groups today, ladies and gentlemen. The aware, that's the DAFO group, who have read the research and realize that what's going on in China with transplantation is mass killing of innocents and cover-up. They react accordingly, distancing themselves from the Chinese transplant profession, encouraging others to do likewise. The naive, who do not consider the research and argue that doing so falls outside of their area of expertise. They hear research conclusions on the one hand and party-state propaganda on the other, and they draw no conclusion. The foolish buy the Chinese party-state propaganda. They parrot its line that research demonstrating mass killings of innocent is based on rumor. They echo the party line that research is unverifiable. although it is both verified and verifiable. They repeat its claim that abuses are in the past when they are not. They say they don't have the time to read research into transplant abuse in China, or the grace to invite people like Ethan and Enver to their conferences that they arrange quite often. Outside of China, organ sources are either dead, or at least brain dead, before the sourcing, and alive both before and afterwards. China is the only country on earth, ladies and gentlemen, where sources are killed by organ extraction and where sources are alive before and dead afterwards. Beijing has no credible answers to the work of independent researchers who have demonstrated the mass killing of innocents. And actually, Dr. Toti is one of the most persuasive, because as you'll hear in a moment, or a few moments, he was one of the surgeons who first did these operations, and I suspect he'll talk to you about that. Given the scale of the transplantation industry in China, it's impossible to deny the search in any credible manner. Party propaganda denying official data, pretending what is there is not there, can persuade only the gullible or the willfully blind. One can only hope the willingness to confront the truth about China will prevail generally in the transplantation profession before many more innocents are killed for their organs. Yeah, I think I've mentioned the forced labor camps. It's in the text if you want to read it. But the really important point is that these people are sent on the police signature to these forced labor camps across China. A model, by the way, created by Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler. There are no hearing, no appeals, nothing. They work 16 hours a day, we're told. They make consumer products. We've heard about people making Homer Simpson slippers, McDonald's toys, Christmas decorations, obviously for multinational companies outside of China. And as I say here, inmates, this constitutes gross corporate irresponsibility and a violation of WTO rules, calling for an effective response by all trading partners of China. The U.S. had a law saying you couldn't import products made with slave labor, but I think Ethan will agree they didn't enforce it. About a year and a half ago, I think they tried to tighten it up, and I hope they're enforcing it now, but I think it's the only country that does have such a law, hopefully now enforced. So in conclusion, yeah, you might find this of interest. James Mann, author of China Fantasy and former Beijing bureau chief of the Los Angeles Times, says, quote, and it's so true, I think you'll agree, democratic governments around the world need to collaborate more often in condemning Chinese repression, not just in private meetings, but in public as well. Why should there be a one-way street in which Chinese leaders send their own children to America's and I'm sure Britain's best schools and universities while locking up lawyers at home? The Chinese regime is not going to open up because of our trade with it. And I know Premier Wen Jiabao is actually somebody I admire, and just before he left office he said, quote, without the success of political structural reform, it's impossible for us to fully institute economic structural reform. The gains we have made may be lost, and such an historical tragedy as the Cultural Revolution may happen again. I don't have to tell any of you that President Xi has just been made president for life, and you probably all know too that some of Mao's worst acts occurred after he was made, or he was president for life, and some of the things he did, many of the things he did, which were truly horrible, were done because he was there for life. Governments and business elsewhere and businesses everywhere should examine why they're supporting the violation of so many human rights in order to increase trade and investment with China. It's resulted mostly in national jobs being outsourced. I wonder how many jobs have gone from Britain to China, or Canada, or the U.S. U.S., by the way, estimates it's about 20 million jobs have gone to China, and about 50,000 factories have closed. Most of them have moved to China. Are we so focused on access to inexpensive consumer goods that we ignore the human, social, and natural environment costs paid by abused Chinese nationals to produce them? So finally, in final conclusion, the first step in a better direction is to end organ pillaging, trafficking, tourism now. Ponder the reality that even if only 60,000 transplants per year are being done across China, as I said before, that means about 150 people a day are being killed for their organs. Permit me to invite all of you to join our international coalition against organ abuse in China, which you can do very easily by simply going on our website, endorganpillaging.org. Thank you.
Bravo. are the power behind the ITNJ. Add your voice. Sign the treaty.